Hi, this is Mike Dierks with the Presbytery of Ohio. I'm the Regional Home Missionary Coordinator, and I'm excited today to have our interview with Dr. Eric Watkins, who's going to be conducting our Evangelism and Outreach workshop on September 14th. So, Eric, welcome and share a little bit about why this is an important workshop for churches to engage in.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks for the opportunity to talk a few minutes here, for the invitation to come up and to serve the saints in the Presbytery of Ohio and related neighbor churches in the area. Evangelism is obviously a big part of the life of a healthy local church. It's often the case that evangelism kind of fluctuates in the life of churches, in the sense that some churches are doing, I would say, really well at reaching their neighbors for Christ, or at least attempting to reach their neighbors for Christ. Others are probably struggling with it a good bit, if they were honest. So we are all in different places there, and I certainly don't consider myself an expert on the subject, but a student, and one that really has a heart for the lost and a deeply engaging outreach in the life of the local congregation. And if I were to put just one sort of a challenging context to the conversation, I think sometimes we assume that if churches are like reformed and confessional, pretty buttoned up, not wavering much in their confessional allegiances, that makes them in and of themselves healthy churches. And I'm not persuaded that's entirely accurate. Maybe one way to say it would be churches that are consistently confessional are also healthfully evangelistic. But if a church is not healthfully evangelistic, I think it's worth questioning if they're being consistently confessional. Why that matters is, in a context like ours and some of our neighbor federations, sometimes we get so focused on ministries of inreach, or tend to collapse evangelism simply into the ordinary means of grace on the Lord's Day, which I believe in wholeheartedly and very strongly. But there is more to reaching our neighbors for Christ than just preaching on Sunday morning. And there are all kinds of great questions that we need to engage together. Like what is the role of lay people in the life of evangelism in a local church? And there are different opinions on that subject. There's been fantastic material published on that subject. So that's something that we will engage together as well. But even things like, is there an inherent contradiction in being confessionally reformed and Calvinistic and evangelistic at the same time? In other words, is there a tension between Calvinism and evangelism? And I think the answer wholeheartedly is no. They're not. They're actually quite consistent with one another. And the history of missions is dominated by Reformed, Calvinistic, confessional people. But then when you get into the weeds on it and begin to ask questions like, how do we cultivate a culture of evangelism in the life of a local church? Or how do we overcome obstacles to evangelism in the life of the local church? That's where it gets hard. So in a certain sense, part one is persuading people like evangelism really is something that's very important in the life of the church. It's not the most important thing in the life of the church. Worship is, but evangelism is really important, and it's integral to the life of a healthy congregation or church plant, either one. But then on the other side of that is just, okay, so what do we do? And I think this is where a lot of churches struggle. Like at the end of the day, okay, yes, I hear what you're saying, and I want more of that in our church plant or in our congregation, but what do we do? And those are some of the things that we will talk about, not as though I come with some magic wand, or that there's even a one size all fits approach to evangelism. But at the end of the day, hopefully we'll have some helpful suggestions that we can take back to our local churches, beginning with our sessions, and contemplate how we can healthfully embody the work of evangelism in the life of the local church.
Good. So the conference then will not only just deal with, we'll call it the philosophical side of evangelism, but the practical side of how do we put feet to what we've learned and not just walk away saying, yeah, that was a good lecture.
Exactly. I think people are coming from different places on the philosophical side, which makes for an interesting conversation when you get into it. But then at the end of the day, the practical questions are sometimes the trickiest, right? Because what works well in one place may not work quite as well in another. And we want to be sensitive to those little regional and local nuances. Also, different churches are composed of different personalities, from the pastor to the people in the pulpit. And what one guy does really well and perhaps even fruitfully might not work for another person, even another pastor. And so at the end of the day, you're trying to figure out where those sweet spots are and doing it in a way that's motivated by gratitude and thankfulness, not guilt and manipulation. The question of the heart and motivation, all those things are super important.
Good, good. Last question. As we look at this, we're seeing a world that's different from the one that, at least for my generation, has grown up in. Is this going to talk about how do we address this culture that we live in, that some people will call it post-Christian, some will call it post-truth, the world that we live in where just everything seems upside down?
Yeah, the second talk will engage that subject, particularly overcoming obstacles in evangelism. But I think there's sort of a double-edged sword, if you will, pointing at us. On the one hand, it's addressing the madness of the world outside the church, outside our homes, a post to everything world, post-institutional, post-truth, post-church in some ways. Like it's a challenging spot to be in, although it's not a daunting one. I think it's a wonderful time to be alive as a Christian, as a pastor, as a parent, engaging a world that's gone upside down and is in many ways rudderless and hopeless. And even at the same time, with the advent of the internet and the way that media affects our covenant kids, in a certain sense, the rural city has disappeared. The internet came in and took it over, and now iPads and iPhones and things like that have just really changed the game in terms of our kids' social connectivity to the world around us. And so in many ways, a big challenge before us is not simply reaching the lost, but discipling and keeping our covenant kids in a world that has lost its mind. And there are different approaches to this. There has been the isolationist approach to thinking about how our families and the church sort of exist in relationship to the world around us, which is very tempting. I've got 4 kids, and today's my daughter's 6th birthday. I feel like a protective dad and get it. But I don't know that the isolationist approach is biblical, wise, or helpful. In many ways, I think training our covenant kids to understand the obstacles that we're seeing, but also how to engage people like in real life, not just from the classroom, teaching them apologetics and preparatory things, but to actually conversationally engage people that are outside the church. That is in many ways the challenge before us as we attempt to raise up our covenant kids in a world gone mad.
Yeah, well, thank you. And Eric, we're looking forward to having you September 14th, reminding all of the watchers, September 14th, Grace Church Columbus is the live event, but we'll be live streaming it. And I would encourage you to, those that are going to be watching from a distance, not just to watch, but plan something that Saturday afternoon. Go into your community, go into a city park, go to a place where people congregate, and just share the gospel. And most of that's early stages. Learn how to ask good questions, and all these things will be unpacked. I'm excited for this. I think it's going to be great for the church at large to hear this message. Thank you for your time, and looking forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
If I can just highlight one thing, because I'm not sure we said it in the last few minutes, but on the event of the 14th, we will actually go out together and do evangelism at Ohio State University. So if that wasn't said earlier, I want to make sure that we do get it in there because it's so important to me that we not just talk about evangelism in the safe confines of the classroom, but that we get out afterwards and try to engage people with the gospel, which I know is hard and daunting for some people, because I like to say, if you can do that, everything else is like super easy. And no one's ever died, at least with me, doing evangelism that way. And so we're gonna do that together on the 14th as well.
All right. I hope you'll be able to attend this conference. It will be well worth your time. You'll gain a lot of information, as well as equip yourself to be able to take the gospel into your community. I urge you to invite friends, other church people, neighbor churches are welcome to attend. Come, get equipped, and then go out and share the gospel. Register. The website is up here on the screen, as well as in the comment sections. Register today. Get your seat, as it were. Join us for this wonderful opportunity to share Jesus Christ to our neighbors.